To India now, where villages are lighting up with electricity instead of candles. Prime Minister Narendra Modi says all of India's villages now have access to power. When Modi took office in 2014, 300 million people did not have electricity. Now, the government says more than 5 million homes have power, but villages across the country still face major hurdles. CBSN contributor Gabe Lipton is here to walk us through the story. He writes for Signal, a newsletter produced by G0 Media. Good to see you.
Great to be with you, Vlad.
So Prime Minister Modi tweeted his victory of providing every village in India with access to electricity, but we know that millions of people are still living in the dark. Take us through what the actual facts are here.
Yeah, so he comes out and he sort of declares mission accomplished. There are still about 30 million Indians living without electricity. The standard the government uses for deciding a village is electrified is that they have 10%. 10% of households have electricity. So he really is a pretty low standard, and the actual number of people, again, because a village can be considered electrified and still have homes without electricity, this is more of in part a political play on his part ahead of major state and local elections, ahead of a big election next year, to say that he's delivering on his development agenda, which is sort of his big platform of his first term in office.
So it seems as if he's sort of, he's fudging here because of a political calculation. And electricity is such a big deal. I lived in Nigeria, which also struggles with a power issue, and it affects, obviously, disproportionately poor people. So in India, we're talking about people who are on the lowest rungs of the ladder in that country. How do they see this?
So I think that the main, again, as I mentioned, the main sort of agenda item of Modi's first term, he came into office in 2014, was to lift poor people out of poverty, to develop the country. And he has sort of a mixed track record on this front. Electrification is a major issue. Other things like tax reform, goods and services tax were other parts of it. But what he's trying to do is sort of emulate the Chinese model. But it's a mixed track record. Today, the average income in India is still about a fifth of what it is in China. So India is still a fairly poor country overall. And again, he faces electoral challenges in state and local elections, one this month actually, and then next year a big national election. An interesting political point. The members of his National Democratic Alliance, which controls the national politics, a lot of the parties in that alliance are local and state parties. So part of this electrification plan and the broader development agenda is to keep all of those parties in the coalition loyal to him. And because it's a country that's so divided along both caste lines and religious and ethnic lines, it's about spreading wealth to all of these different stratas of society.
Well, any leader who puts forth a bold plan like that should be commended, although the question, of course, will be, how will the actual plan in place look for people who are on the lowest rungs of society, and ultimately how much they are willing to invest to upkeep it, because that's the other issue, right? It's not just bringing power to a village, it's actually maintaining a power grid, a viable one.
It's an interesting question. We've seen a lot of leaders do this, state these big claims for development. President Xi Jinping of China famously said by 2020 there'll be no extreme poverty in China. He's not an elected leader, so it's a different calculus for him. Right. But for Modi, it is in part a political thing. He wants to get reelected next year, and he sees this as an avenue to do so, to go out and say, look, we've accomplished these things. But I think it really is unclear whether people are feeling this on their day-to-day lives. As I mentioned on the electrification front, it's sort of a mixed bag.
Yeah. All right. Every week, Signal highlights some of the hard numbers defining our world. So what are some of today's numbers?
So one of my favorite numbers, there's a big election in Tunisia. It's the first actual local election since the Arab Spring. 15% of Tunisians are unhappy with the state of their local economy. They don't think things are getting better. This is a major issue for the country. It's easy to go, it's not easy, but Tunisia is sort of this bright spot of the Arab Spring. But the question now...
It's the birthplace of the Arab Spring.
It's the birthplace of the Arab Spring. The question now is, can they transition to increasing people's living standards? Can they sort of make an inclusive democratic society? These elections that are on Sunday are a big test of that.
All right. Gabe Lipton, always great to have you.
Thank you so much.
Friend.
Great to be with you.
You can check out all of these stories and more by subscribing to the Signal newsletter. Sign up for it at g0media.com.